Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Wyoming Territory, 1867. Yates Jameson stared at the scene unfolding before him with mounting disgust. The makeshift auction stage, nothing more than a few wooden planks raised on barrels, had been erected at the edge of Sweetwater Springs, a mining settlement that had sprung up almost overnight when gold was discovered in the nearby hills. He'd come to town for supplies, not to witness human trafficking disguised as labor contracts. Yet here he stood, watching as 3 young Chinese women huddled together on the platform, their eyes downcast, bodies trembling despite the warm June air. Next up, 3 celestials, fresh from the boat, bellowed the auctioneer, a greasy-haired man with tobacco-stained teeth, strong backs, skilled hands, good for cooking, cleaning, and whatever else you might fancy. His suggestive wink drew raucous laughter from the crowd of miners and railroad workers. Yates felt his jaw tighten. At 52, he'd seen plenty of ugliness in this expanding country, had even participated in some of it during his younger, more foolish days. But the last decade had changed him. Losing his wife Sarah to influenza 10 years prior had left him raising 3 sons alone on their cattle ranch outside town. The responsibility had forced him to become a better man than he'd ever planned to be. Starting bid is $75 for the lot. Who'll give me $75? The women couldn't have been older than 20. One appeared even younger, perhaps 16 or 17. They wore simple cotton dresses, their long black hair hastily arranged. The oldest of the 3 kept her arm protectively around the youngest, while periodically whispering what Yates assumed were words of comfort. He thought of his sons back at the ranch. Matthew, 24, serious and responsible since childhood. Daniel, 22, quick to laugh, but quicker to work. And Thomas, just 20, thoughtful and gentle with a poet's soul despite his rancher's hands. Good men all, though lonely ones. The isolation of ranch life had left them with few opportunities to meet suitable women, especially with Yates keeping them busy expanding their cattle operation. I've got 75. Do I hear 80? Hands went up around him, driving the price higher. The intent in some men's eyes made Yates's stomach turn. These women wouldn't be destined for mere housework in most of these bidders' homes. $150, Yates heard himself say, his voice cutting through the crowd. Heads turned. He wasn't known as a labor contractor or a man who employed Chinese workers. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose with interest. $150 from Jameson. Do I hear $160? Another miner raised his hand. $160. Yates stepped forward. $200. He met the auctioneer's gaze steadily. The crowd murmured. That was more than fair market value, even for 3 workers. $200 going once, twice. $250, shouted a burly railroad foreman near the front. Yates didn't hesitate. $300. The railroad man turned to glare at him, then spat on the ground and shook his head. He wouldn't go higher. $300 going once, going twice. Sold to Jameson for $300. As Yates approached the stage to pay, the 3 women finally looked up, their expressions a mixture of fear and uncertainty. The youngest began to cry silently. The oldest said something to her in Chinese, her tone gentle despite her own obvious distress. Here, Yates said, handing over the money to the auctioneer. I'll need their papers. The man counted the bills with grimy fingers before producing 3 crudely printed documents. Labor contracts. 5 years of service each. They're bound to work for you, and you're bound to feed and house them. Names are there, though good luck pronouncing M. He chuckled. Most folks just give him American names anyway. Yates took the papers without comment, then approached the women. Up close, he could see details he'd missed from the crowd. The oldest had a small scar near her right eyebrow. The middle one clutched a tiny embroidered pouch hidden in her palm, and the youngest wore a jade pendant beneath her collar, just barely visible. My name is Yates Jameson, he said slowly, unsure if they understood English. I have a ranch outside of town. You'll be safe there. The oldest nodded slightly, though whether in understanding or merely acknowledgement of his words, Yates couldn't tell. Come with me, he said, gesturing toward his wagon. They followed obediently, the oldest leading the way while keeping the youngest close beside her. The crowd had already turned its attention to the next item up for auction, a collection of tools from a defunct mining operation, seemingly forgetting the 3 lives that had just been bartered away. At the wagon, Yates helped each woman climb into the back, then covered them with a tarp. To keep the sun off, he explained, miming the gesture of shielding his face. Again, the oldest nodded. As they left town, Yates's mind raced. What had he done? Bought 3 human beings, the very thing his late wife had always denounced, even when it came to the labor contracts that many insisted weren't slavery, but merely temporary servitude. Sarah would have been appalled at the auction, but would she have approved of his solution? And what would his son say? He hadn't discussed bringing workers to the ranch, let alone 3 young women from a distant land who spoke no English. The Jameson ranch was prosperous but modest. They employed 2 local men as hands during busy seasons, but otherwise managed themselves. 2 hours later, as the wagon approached the ranch house, Yates still hadn't settled on exactly what to tell his sons. The women had remained quiet throughout the journey, occasionally whispering among themselves, but making no attempt to speak to him. As the wagon rolled into the yard, Matthew emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes widened at the sight of the 3 strangers climbing down from the wagon. "Pa? What's this?" he called, approaching cautiously. Before Yates could answer, Daniel and Thomas appeared from the corral, equally confused. "Boys," Yates said, clearing his throat. "There was an auction in town today. These women were being sold as laborers. The men bidding." He trailed off, not wanting to spell out the likely fate the women would have faced. "I couldn't let it happen, so I brought them here." The 3 women stood close together, eyes darting between the Jameson men. Matthew frowned. "You bought them? Like property?" "I bought their contracts," Yates corrected, though the distinction felt hollow even to him. 5 years each. "But I don't intend to hold them to that." Thomas, always the most sensitive of the brothers, stepped forward slowly. "They look scared to death, Pa." "I expect they are," Yates replied. "They've been shipped halfway around the world to a strange country where they don't speak the language, then put up on an auction block." "Wouldn't you be scared?" Daniel, studying the women with open curiosity, asked, "Do they have names?" Yates consulted the papers. According to these, they're Meilin, Xiaoying, and Jingfei. He struggled with the pronunciations. The oldest woman, Meilin, according to the order on the papers, spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. "Meilin," she said, pointing to herself. Then, gesturing to the others, "Xiaoying." "Jingfei, you understand English?" Yates asked, surprised. "Little," Meilin replied. "Learn on ship. 3 months." 3 months on a ship, Thomas echoed, his expression softening further. "They must be exhausted." "And hungry," added Daniel. Matthew, still looking troubled, finally nodded. "Let's get them inside. They can have the spare room for now." The spare room was small for 3 people, but it was clean and private, with a large bed that could accommodate them until better arrangements could be made. The Jameson house was substantially built, 2 stories with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a large kitchen, dining room, and sitting room downstairs. Sarah had insisted on comfort and civilized living, even on the frontier. As the women were shown to their room, Yates pulled his sons aside in the kitchen. "I know this is unexpected," he began. "That's putting it mildly, Pa," Matthew interrupted. "What exactly is your plan here?" Yates sighed. "I didn't have much of a plan beyond getting them away from that auction. But now that they're here—" He hesitated, uncertain how to express the half-formed idea that had been developing on the ride home. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Pa, you're not thinking of matching us up with them, are you?" "Because that would be—" "No," Yates said quickly, then reconsidered. "Well, not directly. But I won't lie to you boys. Watching them up on that platform, I did think about how this ranch needs women. How you boys need wives. How I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to see grandchildren before I die." Daniel laughed nervously. "So you decided to just buy us some brides?" "Pa, that's not how it works." "Of course that's not how it works," Yates replied sharply. "I'm not suggesting forcing anyone into marriage. But they need protection, a safe place to live. We need help around the ranch. Perhaps, in time, if there's mutual respect and affection." Matthew shook his head. "They don't even speak our language." "Meilin speaks some," Yates pointed out. "And languages can be learned. Your mother taught me to read, remember? I was practically illiterate when we married." "This is different," Matthew insisted. "Is it?" Yates challenged. "When I met your mother, I was a rough trail hand with nothing to offer but calloused hands and big dreams. She was an educated woman from a good Boston family. Everyone said we didn't belong together. Too different. Wouldn't work. But she saw something in me worth taking a chance on. The brothers exchanged glances, considering their father's words. Look, Yates continued. All I'm saying is give it time. Get to know them. Help them learn English. Show them kindness. What happens after that? Well, that's for each of you to decide, and for those young women too. They'll have choices here, which is more than they would have had with most of the men at that auction. After a moment, Thomas nodded slowly. That seems fair. We can at least give them a safe place to stay. And teach them English, Daniel added, warming to the idea. I've always been good with languages. Matthew remained skeptical, but finally conceded. Fine, but they're not servants here, understood? They work alongside us, not for us. Yates smiled, relief washing over him. Agreed. Now, let's see about getting them something to eat. Over the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Mei Lin, at 22, proved to be not only quick with languages, but also a natural leader. She had been a merchant's daughter in China before her family's debts had forced them to sell her and her two cousins to labor brokers. By the end of the first month, her English had improved dramatically, allowing her to share more of their story and to help her cousins navigate their new environment. Xiaoying, 20, was quiet but observant, with clever hands that could mend almost anything. She took to working in the vegetable garden, expanding it substantially and introducing unfamiliar plants from seeds she'd carried in her small embroidered pouch, Chinese cabbage, daikon radishes, and peculiar greens that added welcome variety to the ranch's meals. Jingfei, the youngest at 17, initially remained the most withdrawn, often sitting for hours watching the mountains on the horizon. But Thomas's gentle patience gradually drew her out. He showed her his small collection of books, reading to her each evening, helping her form English words with her tentative voice. Matthew maintained his distance at first, polite but reserved. As the ranch's foreman in all but name, he spent long days managing the cattle and handling business matters. But Maylin's intelligence caught his attention. She began helping him with the account books, her merchant background giving her an unexpected facility with numbers. My father taught me, she explained one evening as they sat at the dining table, ledgers spread between them. He said, even if I am girl, I must understand business. Smart man, Matthew commented, watching as she efficiently calculated the feed costs for the coming winter. Not smart enough, she replied softly. Borrowed too much money. Bad partners. Lost everything. Matthew hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. Do you hate being here? Away from your home? Maylin considered this, her pen pausing above the paper. I miss China. Miss my mother. But China not good for women with no family, no money. She met his eyes directly. Here, I learn new things. Work hard, but eat well. No one beat me. No one. She searched for the word. No one forced me. And that's enough? Just not being mistreated? For now, yes, she answered honestly. Later, maybe want more. But first must survive. Then can dream. Her pragmatism impressed him. Matthew had always valued clear-eyed realism over sentiment. What would you dream of if you could? He asked, surprising himself with his curiosity. A small smile touched her lips. Business, maybe. Or teach. Or, she gestured around her. Place like this. Land. Animals. Sky so big you can breathe. Matthew nodded, a new respect forming. That's why my mother loved it here too. The sky. Their conversation was interrupted by laughter from the kitchen, where Daniel was attempting to learn Chinese phrases from Xiaoying. His exaggerated pronunciations had her covering her mouth to stifle her giggles. No, she corrected, taking his hand and pressing his fingers to his lips to show him the proper position. Like this. Daniel's attempts improved, and Xiaoying rewarded him with a brilliant smile that transformed her usually serious face. Good. You learn fast. I have a good teacher, he replied, holding her gaze until she blushed and looked away. Outside on the porch, Thomas and Jingfei sat side by side on the swing Sarah had insisted on installing years ago. A book lay open between them, but they weren't reading at the moment. Instead, Thomas was pointing out constellations as they appeared in the darkening sky. That one is Cassiopeia, he explained. See how it forms a W? Jingfei nodded, her face upturned to the stars. In China, we call this area Ziwei Yuan, purple forbidden enclosure. home of Celestial Emperor. Thomas looked at her with surprise. You know astronomy? She nodded, the jade pendant at her throat catching the last light of dusk. My grandfather teach me stars. He say, if lost, stars guide home. Are you lost? Thomas asked softly. Jingfei considered this, her delicate features thoughtful. Was lost. On ship. In America. She glanced at him. Here, less lost each day. Inside, Yates observed these interactions with quiet satisfaction. The ranch felt alive again in a way it hadn't since Sarah's death. There was laughter, conversation, the comfortable bustle of a home rather than just a place where work got done and men slept. As summer turned to fall, the relationships between the young people deepened. Matthew and Maylin developed a partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Daniel and Xiaoying's playful language exchanges evolved into long conversations about their different childhoods and dreams for the future. Thomas and Jingfei found connection through books and stars, her English blossoming under his patient tutelage. Yet Yates was careful not to push. When neighboring ranchers made crude remarks about his Chinese harem, he responded with cold fury that quickly silenced such talk. When the minister from town visited, hinting at impropriety, Yates made it clear that the women were under his protection as part of his household, with all the respect that entailed. I've paid off their contracts, he told Reverend Phillips. They're free to leave any time they choose. But I hope they'll stay. As what exactly? The minister pressed. As whatever they decide to be, Yates replied firmly. That evening, after the minister departed, Yates gathered everyone in the sitting room. I need to make something clear, he began. Those contracts I bought, I voided them. You three, he nodded to the women, are not bound to this ranch or to us in any way. If you wish to leave, I'll provide money and safe passage to wherever you want to go. Maylin translated for her cousins, then replied, we understand. Thank you. That said, Yates continued, I hope you'll consider staying, not as workers, but as family. The room fell silent. Even his sons looked surprised at this declaration. I brought you here partly to save you from a terrible fate, Yates admitted, but also because this ranch has been missing something since my wife died. It's been missing heart. You've brought that back, all of you, together. He looked at each of his sons in turn. I've seen what's growing between you all. I won't pretend I didn't hope for it, but I want no misunderstanding. Any unions that form here must be based on genuine feeling and free choice on both sides. Maylin's eyes were bright with unshed tears. In China, girls like us, no family, no money, have no choice. Here, you give choice. This is great gift. Xiaoying spoke up, her English still halting but determined. I stay. Want learn more. Want. She glanced at Daniel, then quickly away. Want see snow. Never see snow. Daniel grinned. You'll see plenty of that come winter. Jingfei simply nodded, her hand unconsciously seeking Thomas's beside her on the sofa. Matthew cleared his throat. I think we all want the same thing, Pa. A future worth building. He looked at Maylin. Together. When the first snow fell in November, Xiaoying stood on the porch with her face turned up to the sky, catching flakes on her outstretched tongue, while Daniel watched with undisguised adoration. That evening, he asked her to marry him, his proposal delivered partly in halting Chinese that he'd been practicing in secret for weeks. By Christmas, Thomas and Jingfei announced their engagement as well, her shy smile more radiant than the star atop the pine tree they'd cut and decorated in the tradition Sarah had brought west with her from Boston. Matthew and Maylin took longer, their cautious natures leading them to build a solid foundation before committing. But by spring, when the first calves were being born and the meadows turned green again, they too decided to make their partnership permanent. The wedding day arrived in May, with all three couples choosing to marry together in a ceremony that blended American traditions with elements from the women's Chinese heritage. Reverend Phillips, who had come to respect the genuine bonds he witnessed at the ranch, officiated with genuine warmth. The town's attitude had gradually shifted too. Other Chinese immigrants had settled in the area, working on the railroad or in the mines, and the success of the Jameson Chinese brides, as they were sometimes called, helped ease some of the prejudice. Not all. There would always be those who clung to hatred, but enough to allow the expanded Jameson family to participate in community life without constant hostility. Yates watched the triple ceremony with a full heart, thinking of Sarah and how she would have loved these new daughters. As the couples exchanged vows, Matthew and Mei-Lin with dignified sincerity, Daniel and Xiaoying with barely contained joy, Thomas and Jingfei with gentle devotion, he reflected on the strange path that had led them all here. One impulsive decision at an auction block, driven by conscience and loneliness. 3 frightened women with nothing but their courage and intelligence. 3 good men ready to open their hearts to something different. And now, a family forged not by blood or obligation, but by choice. Later, as the celebration continued around him, Mei-Lin approached where Yates sat watching the dancing. "Father," she said, the words still new on her lips but spoken with genuine feeling. "I have news." Yates raised his eyebrows questioningly. "In winter, you will be grandfather," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "Matthew does not know yet. I tell you first." Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Sarah would be so happy," he managed. Mei-Lin nodded. "Matthew tells me of her. Strong woman. Kind heart." She touched Yates's hand. "Like father." As she returned to her husband, Yates looked around at the gathering, his sons and their wives, neighbors who had come to celebrate with them, even a small group of Chinese railroad workers who had been invited to share in the festivities. What had begun as an act of rescue had transformed into something far more meaningful, a new beginning, not just for 3 couples, but for the entire community. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the growing dusk, lanterns were lit around the yard, their warm glow creating islands of light where people laughed and talked together. Different languages mingled in the air, different customs observed side by side with respect rather than suspicion. Yates thought of that day at the auction, how close he had come to simply walking away, telling himself it wasn't his problem. How different everything would have been. Sometimes the most important choices were made in an instant, without full understanding of their consequences. Sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, not as grand gestures, but as simple human decency extended at the right moment. As the first stars appeared overhead, Yates silently thanked whatever fate or providence had placed him in that town square on that particular day. His family's story, unexpected, unconventional, but ultimately beautiful, was just beginning.